Welcome everyone to today's webinar. Thank you for joining us. Today we're going to be talking through financially savvy strategies for families with children. It's going to be a really great conversation. We're going to be talking really mainly about how to engage with our kids no matter what their age. As this whole conversation goes along, we'll be talking through all the age ranges, all the experiences. So how we engage with them, how we can motivate and teach them when we're looking at finance, and then how to also foster that autonomy. As part of the conversation, we'll talk through specific strategies and different financial instruments that we can start to acclimatize our kids to. Today, I am joined by some excellent panelists. We've got Christina Lynn, Christina Horan, and Melanie McConville, all with lots and lots of experience within finance, parenting, and all the things in between. So very excited to have them on board. We're going to go ahead and jump right into it. As a note, before we start, there is a Q&A. It is a live Q&A, so feel free to lob any questions that you have in the Q&A there, and we'll be happy to get to those at the end of the conversation. If there's anything that's pertinent, please feel free to share that. And away we go. So I'll stop sharing here so we can see all of our panelists nice and clear here. Perfect. How's everyone doing?
Great.
Great. Perfect. So when we look at engaging our kids and teaching them financial literacy, one of the first questions that comes to mind is right out the gate, what are some of the best ways that children begin to engage with finance? And Melanie, we were talking a little bit about this before, so I'd love to start with you and get some of your perspective here.
Sure. Thanks, Dylan. My perspective comes as a mother of one teenager. And just to let everybody know, I'm very passionate about teaching kids how to understand money, but at the heart, it's really about helping them love financial literacy and making it fun to learn it. I would say that it really starts with observation. So kids learn by just watching. I mean, that's ultimately how they learn. They learn how we spend money, how we handle money. They see us budget things, maybe not budget things. They see us overspend. They watch us have stress over money. They watch us kind of manage through all of it. So I think the first lessons in financial literacy really start with us as parents and those actions being able to speak louder than words. So if we're not discussing our financial goals, even little ones, I want to be able to save for a vacation so that we can go together. Kids begin to be able to pick up on that, and that can begin to influence their behaviors towards handling money.
Yeah, and I can comment as a mother of three little kids, 7, 5, and 3. I look for fun and easy ways to talk to them. And it's so sweet to see how they understand things at different ages. And speaking of vacations, when my 7-year-old was complaining that we weren't going on spring break and his friends were going to Disney World, I asked him if he knew how much that would cost us. And he guessed $50,000. And I was like, you're probably right at this point. But, told him maybe more in line what I thought it would be, and then ask, how long do you think mommy has to work at her job? How many days do I have to go in and weeks in order to pay for that kind of vacation? And so it was a great way to bring up those kinds of conversations in little everyday ways, just finding those opportunities. And a side note, I would say last year when we would have these conversations, when he was 6, he would say $100 gazillion. So it's been fun seeing how he's learning and growing and understanding the concepts a little bit more.
Sure, I'll chime in. Totally agree with Melanie's comments about how kids learn from observation, and Christina's comments about kind of normalizing talking about money and finding little opportunities to sneak in that topic. Regarding the observations, I think it's interesting. We think oh, okay, I want them to observe me doing this well so that they end up doing it well someday. Unfortunately, that there's two sides to that coin. They see the good things that we do. They also see the things that we don't do very well with money. And so it's one of the best ways that we can answer this question, Dylan, which is how to help kids start engaging with money, is start to look within, like, how are we showing up with money? I'll tell you, I'll be transparent. I'm a saver, right? And I think like, oh, I'm modeling good behavior for my kids. I want them to learn how to save. Well, how they read that, at least at this point, is they view me as Scrooge McDuck, right? And there's like good things about it, but there's also bad things. And so I think it's just help it's hard for us to step back and look at things objectively, but if we can do that while there's still time to like shift or pivot how our attitude or how we're kind of like responding to certain money issues, I think it can be really helpful because like I may be have really good intentions behind you know, like my efforts to save and cut costs and things like that, but my kids may be kind of, I don't want to say traumatized, they're not traumatized, but they might be reading it really different, like, oh, saving money means you get to never have fun, right? And so they might grow up maybe spending a season of their life like blowing all of their money because they never got to do it when they were growing up. So no pressure, right? We're not going to get this 100% right, but my point is I think it does help to like try to step back and like view how we're showing up with money, and is it good? Is there things that we can pivot to try to do it better?
I like that a lot. I think it's pretty common in these conversations that, one of the first concerns that comes up for a lot of parents, and I know it's been true for me, and I'm sure it's been true for everyone here, is, well, I don't want to mess it up, right? It's either we ignore it and we pretend like it's not there so we don't have to worry about it too much, or we worry about it too much and we kind of do this analysis by paralysis thing where we don't really want to dive into it because we're not sure how to. And that's something we'll touch on towards the end of the conversation, a little more detail of how we can work on how we show up and really be thoughtful about that without overstressing through the process as well. I think when we've talked about this too, with some of the examples you shared, like the vacation that's $50,000, which is great that your kid thought that was reasonable too. Yeah, $50,000. It's only $50,000, right? I think one of the hard points is how to establish a foundation, an anchor for kids to understand really what money is worth. And so when we begin to introduce that math of money to our kids, how should we be going about that, and how does that differ from learning math in more of an academic sense with what they're going to be learning at school?
So I'll kind of give my perspective a little bit. I think that the grocery store is an absolute amazing learning lab. So when I think about when my son was young and maybe in first grade and doing quote unquote new math, right? And nothing, even my husband and I went to school to learn how to do new math because it was new for all of us. Didn't make sense to any of us, but the way that I was able to bridge what was going on in the classroom was when we went into the grocery store to really teach just basic concepts. So that early age, we would go and look at cereal boxes. We would talk about, okay, well, this cereal is $5 and this cereal is $3, but we only have $20 to work with. So just again, it's a really big concept for them to grasp, but they can kind of begin to learn those aspects of it. As he progressed in math and perhaps was like learning about pounds or ounces, the fun part was really being able to go to the veggie aisle, and put the vegetables into that scale. And it was like, oh my God, Mom, like, look, it went from 0 to 5. We're gonna get five, right? So just beginning to kind of like learn like the reality of, okay, I'm learning this in school, but this is how it translates to real life. I have lots of different examples of how that has like kind of grown with us. But the other thing I think is even more important is that you have like this amazing opportunity to be able to spend time with your kids having a conversation and to connect with them completely differently. And that to me is even more powerful than anything else because you're learning and growing together and having just open conversations.
I love those ideas, Melanie. You've completely inspired me. Um, as someone who will do anything I can to not go shopping with my children, um, I think these are really, really great reasons to do that. So I will reconsider, maybe try like one kid at a time or something. Um, but like right now, my 7-year-old is learning the value of coins at school. And so we've been taking the coins, adding them up, showing him what it means in paper money. And it is interesting how important actually seeing and feeling that money is, because I realized that he's never seen me use money before. And so it's like a new concept to him.
Yeah.
And, he just sees me using a plastic card to buy things, or even better, they just show up at our house. So, he probably felt like, we just have this Santa Claus that, brings that stuff to us all the time. And so I can only imagine, what that's teaching him. So I love your ideas.
Yeah, I love the coin idea. You can do so much with that. And that could even like grandparents could, great opportunity for grandparents to collect money with them, do the kind of the coin collecting, and even farm money comes into the equation there too. Just being able to see it, touch it, and feel it. So love what you're doing.
Yeah, totally agree with what they're talking about. It's easier said than done. I think that there's still a part of us that feels like maybe our parents or grandparents kind of implicitly taught this, but there's certain topics about money that aren't safe to talk about. And so, like, they're making it sound really easy, right? It's not always that easy, but like the more you can normalize it, I mean, and the earlier you can start, the better, because then they won't feel like it's so foreign to them as they get older. But yeah, just kind of calling that out. I do have a thought on this, and so Dylan, your question was like, how do you start teaching about the math of money? And one thing I think to keep in mind is that your kids are not going to learn the math of money well spending your money. They're going to learn it better when they earn it themselves and then manage that money. So just kind of keep that in mind. I think that's something that like is pops up in research as a takeaway. And the other thing about Melanie's story kind of reminded me of this, like she's real positive about money, right? Again, that's we take that for granted because of this panel that he's curated here, but not everybody has that money attitude around money. Sometimes our attitudes can be kind of negative. Like I'm sure you've heard the saying like money doesn't grow on trees, or
Mhm.
like you need to work really hard for your money. I heard that one growing up. Like though that's not exactly the math of money, but that sets a tone that you can interpret the math differently based on that tone, if that makes sense. And so just like thinking about, okay, what are the things that I'm saying? And what is that teaching them? Like, am I teaching them a scarcity mentality? Or am I like limiting their natural abilities to make money? Or, so just like there's like layers to this onion, if you will.
Yeah, and I think each of us, I mean, especially for us in this group, we were raised by very different generations, right? Our parents and grandparents were raised in generations that had a very different money mindset because of the economic landscapes that they experienced, where scarcity was a very serious problem. And then you had the 80s and 90s when things, took off in certain aspects, but other areas of our economy took a nosedive. And then, of course, you go right into the early 2000s where we have one of the major economic, disasters of our generation. It can be very difficult to navigate those conversations. And then having been raised by people that were maybe a little more held their cards closer to their chest from a financial perspective, to know how to really open that door and to help familiarize our children with finances in a way that um, is comfortable for everybody. Right. So, I mean, one of the things that stands out to me is that, I mean, kids are naturally curious. And you had shared, Christina, some of, how to open that conversation up, make it more comfortable, and just opening the conversation. Do you have any examples of, any particular things you do with kids, or examples you have of really how to address that directly.
Yeah, I would say exactly what you said. Just making it comfortable. The more openly that you can talk about it, um, then the kids are going to be more comfortable making their own financial decisions. And I see that play out with my clients and how they manage and budget. And the ones that say that it's harder for them or it doesn't come as naturally, they don't maybe get it as easily, will say that they just weren't taught it when they were younger, or that money was kind of a taboo subject. And so, yeah, we just want to give everyone permission to make it comfortable, and encourage, kids to ask questions about it, and then ask them questions. I remember asking one of my kids what they thought the plastic card was for. Like when I bought things, they're like, how do you think this works? And I was like, where do you think the actual money's located? And how do you think I'm buying it? And just their responses are amazing. But it kind of gets them thinking. And then it also helps you realize, I'm kind of taken for granted they're understanding the concept of all of this.
That's great. That's fantastic. And so as we're looking at these different concepts and looking at how to address them with our kids, part of the changing landscape of children is really their emotional landscape, is how they change and how willing they are to engage. So when we're looking at these concepts of, okay, we're engaging with our kids, we're starting to have open conversations and meeting them where they're at with whatever their interests might be at the time, how do we motivate them? How do we motivate our kids as we're teaching them about money and finance?
Well, I can kind of kick it off. I would say there's probably no one right way, and I've tried a few different renditions of it. But what we've kind of settled on is more like a weekly earnings to really make that connection for them, that they're earning this. We're not just giving it to them. So kind of changing that verbiage from allowance. But we have a chore chart, and they get a check mark each day that they complete their chores. And then at the end of the week, depending on, how many days that they were able to do it, we'll pay them for that. And then it's all just based off of what their responsibilities can be for that age. So even my 3-year-old, her responsibilities are brushing her teeth, helping, putting on her clothes in the morning, and picking up toys.
I love the fact that you use the word earning. It implies effort, work, ownership. So when somebody, they earn something, they did something to get it, that reinforces the idea that there has to be an action to have a value versus allowance. That suggests something completely different. No strings attached. You can sound very passive. So I really like how you're using the word earning versus allowance. What I'm seeing with my teenager now is the desire to have a car. So he just got his
Hmm.
license, so I'm kind of getting used to that whole concept that he can drive, but he wants a car. So it's saving for a car at this point, and we went to the bank and recently I watched him separate his accounts. So we went from a savings account and then he wanted to have a checking account slash debit account. So he was trying to figure out like, okay, I have a summer job. I know that I'm going to need to save X. So it's interesting for me to watch how he's starting to segment to save.
And then
Yeah.
another note I'll make about, well, once the kids start saving, and again, this took some trial and error, um, because I would find that we would give them money and then one kid would have it all, or this other, kid would put it all in a very inappropriate place. And I'm trying to clean. I'm like, what is this pile of? And so, what we what we're starting to do now is putting it in clear piggy banks. And so that way they can see the money go in, they can see it add up, and they like to dump it all out and count it all the time. But at least they're seeing the progression and what their work is going into.
I think kids are always going to be, I mean, they're going to be at different capabilities, right? My youngest doesn't really understand the concepts very well. So the second he gets money, he's looking to get something from it, right? For him, it's a candy currency, not real currency. He's looking for the next treat. And my second oldest, so I've got an 11-year-old, a 7-year-old, a 5-year-old and a 1-year-old. So I got a bunch of kids running around here. And my 7-year-old especially, he entered a phase where he was just so impulsive with any money that he earned that we had to like hide his wallet because he was just throwing money out the window. And so it got to a point where we developed a process where he'd come and ask us, "Hey, can I have my wallet? I'd like to, get some money out of the bank, essentially, right?" And we'd ask him what it's for, and we'd have a conversation about, okay, well, is this what you really want, or is this just what you want right now? Is this an impulse where you saw this little fidget toy that your friend had and you want to buy another fidget to fit in your bin of 32 other fidgets? Or is this something you really want that you've thought about? And then usually after, 10 or 15 times of having that conversation, it starts to stick. But understanding that that's how it's going to be for kids a lot of the time is, just meeting them where they're at, figuring out how capable they are, and then trying your best to really adjust your approach based on those abilities for each of your kids.
And that makes me think of something that Christina sort of challenged us to think about earlier. And when they have the money, I love how you're kind of talking through like, is that how you want to spend money on it? So you're giving them the opportunity to really think through and problem solve that. So very early on, handling money.
Well, and kids can be stubborn.
Mm.
I hope it's not just my kids. But the first handful of times we had the conversation, he didn't understand the question really of, is this something you want right now or something that you really want? Like actually, like this is something you really want. He was like, I don't understand the difference.
Mm.
So yes, I want it right now and I want it. I don't understand what you're talking about, Dad. But eventually it ended up sticking. And usually what ends up happening is when it really hit home was when he finally got to something that he genuinely wanted, that it was something that he'd be able to hold on to long term, and it wasn't just a candy or a knickknack or a fidget or whatever, and he didn't have the money for it. I know you remember all those candies and those fidgets that you played with for 5 minutes that you spent all that money on? That was you chose to spend on that instead of saving for this, and now look at the situation you're in. And that's when it finally stick is when he had some real skin in the game.
I give you props for allowing him and having the patience to allow him to work through that on his own because me as financial advisor, I'm like, no, you're not spending your money on that. That's what, and I'm just like, now I hear Christina Lynn talk about, other things that can do. And they really, to learn the lessons, they kind of have to, you want them to learn those lessons on the smaller dollars now versus bigger dollars later. So inspiring.
Yeah. And when we're looking at that, I try and make sure that we're not only looking at the negative, right? Don't spend on this, don't spend on that. So when we're looking at savings as an example, what would you all consider some of the best ways to teach kids how to really keep and save their money?
So when my son was young, we had jars. So what Christina is doing with the piggy banks that are, you can visually see the money kind of go up. I think that's great. We would have a jar that was labeled savings and want. So savings and wants, and we'd put money in there. And then when I asked my son, I said, "Hey, like, what have I done like to really help you begin to be a good saver?" He's like, "Well, you took me to the bank and we opened up a savings account together." I'm like, "Oh, so tell me more. Like, what did that do for you?" And he's like, "Well, we went to the bank and I was able to begin to see what a bank was and I saw where the money went. I had to turn it over. I had to write down how much money I was putting in. And then recently you took me to open up a CD and like that mom like was really cool. Like I didn't know what a CD was. So you know, now we just opened up the checking account and I'm going to have to actually learn how to write a check. So, those are kind of some of the things that we did through experience that have like been linked to his desire to save. That and I don't pay for hockey equipment. Have never paid for hockey equipment. So that's always on him. So he always says like, well, kind of taught me that lesson early on, how to like part with my money for hockey.
got that skin in the game, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so we're talking about these spending habits and helping our kids get out of their own way, making sure we're teaching them how to save and different ways that they can do that. I think an important piece to that is understanding the world and the reality that our kids are stepping into with their money and their perception of money. When we're looking at that landscape, are there any psychological tactics that you guys have seen that companies are using to influence spending for us, for our kids, and what should be avoided? What should we be aware of that we need to help our kids avoid?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind as I'm just kind of starting to get into that phase where they're starting to see these things is commercials. And for so long, all we did was the Disney Plus, and so there were no commercials. And now all of a sudden, they're actually seeing some real TV and some other things that apps that we're using, and I'm like, they're like, I want that, I want that, I want that. So I'm like, oh, okay, this is a new phase that we get to teach them about how life is all about companies trying to separate you from your money.
And the add-on features too, right? Like it's not just the Minecraft game, it's the add-ons that they want. Or it's, an avatar. I'm going to create a certain kind of avatar, but hey, mom, it costs X.
The DLC gets you every time. Downloadable content, it'll get you. I mean, I've seen recently. I mean, we live in a debt economy, and there's nothing but debt getting thrown at people constantly, especially the second they turn 18, you're getting credit cards in the door. Even recently, big feature in the news was how DoorDash is starting to include payment plans and debt for food, where you can just, oh, I don't have $5 for a taco from Taco Bell. I'm going to put it on a literal loan, an actual debt obligation for Taco Bell. Um, and even, I mean, college campuses have agreements with DoorDash. It's called Dash Pass. And besides just having credit cards thrown at you, now we've got our kids that are going into college that are being bombarded with these other opportunities to throw away money. In the moment, it's really easy to be impulsive and say, oh, yeah, why not? I'll pay that off later. And then just completely forget about it.
Yeah, and staying up with technology, all the new things that are coming out. I would have never known about um, all the new sports betting apps, except I hear them on the radio. And Dylan, I think you had mentioned it, and I had no idea how prevalent that was. But I can only
My
imagine that.
my son was talking about that the other day. He was sharing with
Yeah.
me and saying that you don't understand, mom. You know, so and so at school is he bets. And I said, well, wait a minute, he's only 15. How does that happen? And he's like, he bets. I'm like, well, where is that money? Like, how's he paying for that credit card? I'm like, well, whose credit card is he using to bet? And he's like, his parents. I'm like, okay. I mean, this is a really like um this is a topic that I think needs lots of exploring just on a lot of different levels. But Christina, you're right. It is it's a it's one that I don't think we've seen the full spectrum of yet.
Yeah, yeah, the psychology and addiction that can happen at such an early age around this.
Well, and it's all through the spectrum now too, where I mean, video games are a pretty classic example of that kind of gambling psychology that get baked into mobile games and to standard video games where it's just that constant hook of just a dollar more, just a dollar more, just a dollar more. We're even seeing it with, this is probably a funny example. My kids are on the younger side, but claw machines, they're everywhere. The arcades around here, for example, more than 50% of them are just claw machines now. And I remember this is one of the first examples that my kids had of learning the hard way where their money's concerned is we take our kids to indoor soccer. I live in Washington State, so it's raining a lot of the year, so we do indoor soccer. And the guy who owns the place put in a claw machine, and it was $5 a pop just to try the claw machine. Now the gimmick was that it was a guaranteed win. Mind you, the plushies you get were literally like 3 inches tall. They're these itty bitty things, but it's a guaranteed win. Why not? My son, Colton, 7 years old, he and if you hear his name pop up, it's a theme. He's definitely my stubborn one in the group. But he was doing chores and earning himself some money. He'd saved up $60 and he blew that all in the course of 1 week on claw machines. And it was a brutal lesson for him to learn because the first time we had the conversation, I sat there, I said, Colt, you do not want to waste your money on this. This is a bad idea. And he basically told me, yeah, cool, I'm going to do it anyway. And that was a hard moment for me because it would have been very easy for me to take his wallet, which I've had to do in other circumstances, but I let him learn the lesson. And he goes and he blows it. And then he's got all these mini little stuffies in his room. And he goes, ugh, I don't even want these anymore. And he brought that up to me proactively. I took the opportunity to drive it home and say, hey, Colt, guess how much it probably cost them to put that stuffy in that claw machine? He's like, wait, what? Guess. He goes, I don't know, $1. And we talked through it and the economies of scale. And talking through that guy probably spent 10, maybe $20 on a big old bag full of them and then put them in and you drop $60 to, get your 6 or 7 that you got there. And he was pretty heartbroken at that point, but it was a good lesson and it was a hard one for him to learn, but I'd rather him learn it now than learn it when he, goes off to college. And when we're talking about that kind of learning the hard way, hopefully it's less of that and more of learning by example. But how can we as parents help to promote our children's autonomy while making sure that they're not, setting themselves up for failure?
Wait, I want to add to the bandwagon here. The
Please do.
psychological traps. Okay, so ones that I'm seeing, I have teenagers. And so they buy a lot of clothes. It's crazy how much they spend on
Hmm.
clothes.
Yep.
At every checkout, I see buy now, pay later. Like somebody already kind of mentioned that, but like
Yeah.
that's a thing now. They make it so easy. And unless we're having those conversations with our kids to explain that, no, that's not like free money. It's going to come back and haunt you, and there's interest charge. They just don't get it. Like we have to have those conversations with them and like help them understand this new concept. The other thing I'm seeing is, oh, I keep running into the iPhone thing. You know how like I don't want to name any names, but like the big phone carrier companies have these commercials that say like, "Oh, get the latest iPhone on us free." And my kids are like, "Mom, why don't you sign us up for that?" It's like kids that doesn't actually work that way. Like I would be paying over $1,000 to get you a nicer phone than I have. Like they just don't get it. And so we just need to like pause and explain these things. Okay, and the last thing I have to add to this pile of garbage
This is great.
um, is credit cards. Like there's just this there's like some sort of like cultural thing that is being taught to our kids that they need to establish good credit. So, mom, I need a credit card and I need to like use it. They don't get it. And so we need to teach them. So, I don't know. I find myself getting a little bit frustrated. I think our own sophistication with this can sometimes hinder us in our profession because we take it for granted that like these things are common sense and they're not. And so just sort of like pausing, taking a deep breath and explaining these things that actually are not common sense to them. Okay. Thank you. I had to get that
No,
off.
that's great. And I think I mean, we've been touching on the autonomy piece quite a bit, and we can come back to that because there's a few questions that are coming in on the heels of this debt conversation. And so I do want to dig into that a little more. To share a personal example, one of the things that I saw a lot, I worked for a credit repair agency in college back in the day. This is more than a decade and a half ago now. But what we did is we worked with a law firm that specialized in helping people repair their credit. They'd reach out to us. We'd help them dig through their credit reporting, figure out what's going on. And most of the people that really had the worst credit, that just were trying to dig themselves out of these holes, were the people that got sent a credit card the day they turned 18 and said, "Oh, free money. Cool." And they swipe and they build all that debt, but because they're kids still, essentially, they don't really understand, okay, well, where did I get this credit from? How do I pay for it? What's the interest rate look like?
Mhm.
And a lot of these interest rates, unfortunately, are extremely predatory, where they're, 20, 30, 40% interest rates because they're young, they don't have any credit. So it balloons up. Or you can even have balloon payments where maybe you'll get the first 6 months to 18 months free, but then the entire balance of interest is due at the end of that term. And unless you know how to read all that fine print, which at 17, 18, probably not going to be too familiar with that, these people got themselves in these massive holes that take years to get out of, and it's really heartbreaking. Um, so when we're looking at our kids, whether they're younger, older, in college, whatever, how can we help them to learn how to manage that debt so that they're, one, avoiding unnecessary debt, but also two, they're able to use debt in a way that's advantageous and appropriate for them as they move through their financial lives.
Well, yeah, as you said, they just get issued credit way too easily. And it was the big issue with credit cards getting handed out to college kids. And now there's a lot of discussions with my clients around college debt and the importance of teaching and speaking to your children about this before they get too far down the I'm going to go to this school and get into all this debt. And so it's discussing it. Well, why are we getting into the debt? And what is the cost of that debt? What is your plan to pay it off? How much money are you going to make? And how long is it going to take you to pay off all that college debt? And so, at the end of the day, is it all worth it or not? So the schools aren't teaching this. And if they are, they're not teaching our kids what our values are. And so letting them know about our experiences. It's important to give them examples of the pitfalls that we've had, that we've experienced, and just be open and transparent and talk through, what debt is to them.
Schools don't teach it. They do not teach it. So like this is a perfect opportunity in schools to be when they're talking about percentages, to be able to like introduce like the loan percentage. So, or to show like a credit card bill and like start to talk about like interest rates. So, like if my bill is X amount and I don't pay it and the interest is 29%, what do you think I'm going to be paying? That is like the bridge that would be phenomenal for schools to be able to teach our kids, so that they begin to learn it and just putting it into practice. You know,
I think that I love that idea. We're all numbers people, so that just totally speaks to us, right? I think that kids, teenagers, young adults, they still have a hard time like conceptualizing those numbers. And so it's not like I have a perfect solution for this, but like even being aware that if I say a certain percent, or even if I say $50,000, right, this is how much this costs,
Yeah.
they don't quite like understand what that means or the implications for that. So the more that we can put it in terms that they do understand, I think will be more helpful. Like, for example, if put $50,000 on a credit card, you are going to be able to afford a beater car versus like a decent used car, a new car when you graduate. That sort of thing, because those are the things that actually resonate with them, not like these sort of abstract large numbers that they're dealing with like hundreds of dollars at a time, not big numbers.
yeah, it's very true.
That's a
Bite-sized pieces and lots of pictures I've found help drawing pictures. We were talking at dinner the other night about credit cards, and my son was really struggling to understand what a credit rating was. He said, "Well, don't I need a credit card in order to get a good credit rating?" And we're like, no, you're 16. You don't have to worry about that right now. And he's like, well, I don't want a credit card because I don't want to be in debt. And then that we kind of, it was interesting for me to understand like he's 16 and still like that this topic is very hard to conceptualize. Um,
Well, and helping them to understand long term what the purpose of credit is, really what necessary credit will be long term, what necessary debt will be long term, that you have to have credit to buy a car, to buy a home, to have all these different opportunities presented to you. You'll have the easy credit. People will be willing to throw student loans at you. People will be willing to throw credit cards at you. It's when you really need it, when you're looking at potentially, buying a home, especially in the housing market that we have, where home prices are increasing more and more. That credit rating and that your credit scores and the interest rates that you're able to target due to your credit score are just going to become more and more important long term for them, helping them understand the purpose of the tool, where a credit card can be useful, how to build credit using a credit card effectively.
I'm glad you said that, Dylan, because I think we were maybe starting to sound like we were vilifying debt, and that's not the case at all. We live in a great country where there is good debt to like you can leverage to, level up with your wealth. But again, back to the whole kids don't know anything that you don't teach them. Like it's just a matter of explaining this kind of debt is bad, bad debt. This kind of debt is good, good debt. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think it's important, especially as we're looking ahead, and we've talked quite a bit about teenagers and younger kids. I'd like to look a little bit more at planning for the future and looking at strategies to help our kids plan for the future, whether they're approaching, high school or college. What would be some steps and strategies that you could recommend that would help parents to prepare their kids for that transition?
I can kind of kick it off from a client perspective around college because the conversations typically will go like, oh, I'm preparing for them. I'm contributing to a 529. And, but a 529 is just a way to save for college. And so there's so many more conversations that need to be had around what your goals are, how much do you need to contribute to achieve those goals, your personal thoughts on how much you want to help them and how much is their responsibility. I remember, my motivation for getting up at my 7:30 class in the morning was because I was paying for it and I didn't want to waste my money. So, I don't know if I was getting a full ride and have skin in the game, I may not have been as motivated to walk to class in the dark, snowy winter mornings. But, every kid's different.
Well, and there's a balance that we want to strike too, right? I know for me, I had to pay for all my college. That meant working full time while in school full time. And it's a lot. It's a lot of work and it's very exhausting. And I know that a lot of parents, especially when you have the means or you're planning to have the means, right? You're working towards that goal, is trying to find that balance, right? Of I want my kids to have skin in the game so they understand the concept and they really are appreciative. But then how do I also set them up for success because I've worked hard to get where I'm at, and there are benefits to that. Um, and part of what you touched on as well, Christina, was kind of this disconnect between the reality of a solid education does not translate to a reality of financial success and responsibility long term. I'd love to talk a little bit more about that because, I mean, this is something that's coming up more frequently, that just because you get a degree does not mean that you're going to have a financial future that's set up for you now. Um, I'd love to hear any examples you all have of how you've had that conversation with your kids, or how you might approach that conversation if it's something that you're looking to approach with them. And I'm happy to jump in with my own examples here. So, I mean, for me, when I'm looking at clients that I've worked with, as an example, part of what we do a lot of on the advisory side with our clients is go through goals-based financial planning, where it's looking at specifically, where do I want to be? And for our kids, it's, who do I want to be when I grow up, right? Kind of different framing. But when we're looking at that financial planning, is okay, well, let's start based on what you want your end result to be. And for our kids, especially as they're getting into high school and college, a lot of the time they haven't had that thought process. It's more, Well, generally I want to be a doctor. I want to be an actor. I want to be a lawyer, whatever, right? I don't know what I want to be. I just want to not live at my parents' house anymore. I want to be free, right? Uh, but walking them through what the economic landscape looks like. Okay, well, let's start with, well, where do you want to live? Okay, you want to live in Southern California? Great, let's talk about what that economic landscape looks like. You want to live in Idaho? You want to live in Florida? Let's look at what that looks like. Okay, then what town in those states where ideally would you want to live? What do you want your lifestyle to look like? Okay, well, let's look at your degree that you're looking at. Does that degree potentially lead to a career that will be able to sustain that lifestyle? How much does it all cost? And help them back into it financially so they can understand the reality of the life that they're envisioning for themselves and the work that it takes. And I think this calls back nicely to what we talked about before, meeting our kids where they're at. We had examples of, the claw machines and the when kids are younger, just figuring out what connects with them, whether it's the toys, it's the clothes that our teenage daughters are buying constantly, right? What is it that anchors them to the concept of money financially and to understand how they're connected and then bringing that long term to the big picture of where our kids want to be when they're on their own. They have their own lives and the money has to be there to make it happen. What's it realistically going to take? And how are you going to get there and make it work? And then plan from that. I think it's the kind of thing that we do for ourselves. And I think it's a good framework for our kids to be working off of as they move into that independence for themselves as well.
Those are great conversations. Great questions. I love it.
Now, one point we haven't touched on, and we're running up towards the end of our time here, so I want to make sure we can get to Q&A. We touched on it very lightly, but how do we make sure that we're showing up appropriately? Christina Lynn, you touched on it a bit at the beginning. I want to make sure we got back to this. How do we ensure that our kids are developing a healthy relationship with money and that we're not bringing any baggage to the table that is going to be problematic in that process?
Well, let me pop that balloon to put everyone at ease. We're not going to do it perfectly, and that's okay. We're all human, and I think everyone on this call has really good intentions around, bringing up financially savvy kids and grandkids. So you're doing a good job already, I think. What two principles that like we hadn't touched on yet that I think fall in line with this is, regardless of how old your kids are, again, it's always better to start younger, but this can apply even into adulthood, is to catch your kids doing well when it comes to finances, because they're just think about yourself. Like, do you want to learn by constantly being criticized, or do you want to learn from being like positively reinforced? What means more to you? For me, I want to cry when, no, I'm kidding. I just, I'll leave it at that. The other thing is, all of our kids are going to make mistakes when it comes to money management. That's just a total given. Think about yourself. Like, how many money mistakes have you made, right? Countless for me, and I'm in the profession. Um, it requires, like, one way that we know that we can do well showing up with this, with your question, Dylan, is to give just endless amounts of grace to our kids with this. I know that there's like boundaries you need to set, but in terms of within reason, when they're messing up, to be patient and help them process like their mistake, and so that they can do better next time. Again, think about yourself. When you make a mistake, do you need somebody like hounding you about it? Or maybe like processing it a little bit with somebody else in debriefing mode is helpful, but you don't need someone like barking at you and guilt tripping you for it. Like, you know, trying to embody more of like a partnership with them as they get older, I think can really help. And I know we weren't able to talk about the autonomy piece much, but that's so important with this, is like, you only control so much. And Melanie and I are learning like you really control very little as they get older. The goal ultimately is to foster financial independence with them. And you do that by kind of letting go of the reins more and more as they age. and letting them make their own mistakes, right? It's like Christina Horan said, like it's better to make smaller mistakes under your roof versus larger mistakes when they're out on their own. And I know of a lot of you have kids and grandkids are already out on their own, but I think that these concepts still apply.
Yeah, and I think we talked about gambling in the negative sense, but in the positive sense, parenting can often feel like we're gambling on our kids, right? And as we're teaching them and we're growing and giving that autonomy to our kids can feel like a gamble, is what I mean.
Yeah, we
And
spend 20 years like, oh, I hope that this is gonna pay
uh,
off, you know.
yeah, well, and it's better to as we go through this process to make smaller bets incrementally as we go, right? Make the small bets while they're young, and you can afford to miss, right? That card didn't hit that time. Okay. We lost that bet, but let's rework it and see how we can do it better rather than putting all your chips in right when they move out the door. Not to say that it still won't feel very much like that when it does happen, but to have the process and have made the bets early on so that you're not going all in and hoping that you get the right cards to and that your kid gets the right cards to really make it happen for themselves.
One
Yeah.
thing that I'll make is just remembering that money is a tool for achieving, goals and dreams, and putting it, in that kind of perspective, how, why it's so important, why we use it, and that kind of takes away maybe some of those emotions or anxiety that come up with, our personal, how we identify with, personal money patterns. But I think that's a good just thing to keep in mind when we're trying to teach kids is that money is a tool.
Yeah. Now, one last thing I want to make sure we touch on before we get to Q&A is we talked about this a little bit in preparation for this webinar, some of the research behind this. So I'd love to have us touch on this a little bit is with all of our best efforts, why is it that different kids raised in the same house have completely different outlooks on money and being financially responsible?
I can tackle this one unless either of you want to. All right, I'll start. Okay, two main reasons. One is what they call financial socialization. So this is like the experiences and attitudes and behaviors your kids experienced in their family and friends and neighbors, like their world growing up. So that Melanie kicked us off by saying this. They're not going to listen to what you say. They're going to watch what you do, right? And that really shapes things. Kids can have different financial socializations within the same roof. Like maybe one had one experience, regarding allowances or a neighbor kid and the other didn't. Or maybe the kids are farther apart like mine and I have a blended family, for example. Like kids can get treated differently, right? And so that can make sense. The second piece is we all have different money personalities. There's a lot of research on this. This is kind of a cool thing if you guys want to like Google this. There's lots of different thought leaders out there, but we all are sort of wired differently when it comes to like how we show up with money, our money personality. And so that also plays in with that financial socialization piece. So our kids are all really unique when it comes to how they handle money, and they're not going to be like you, right? Much to my disappointment, my kids are not Scrooge McDucks like me. And I'm trying, I'm learning to just like be okay with how like their little unique money personalities. What can I do to lean into their uniqueness to set them up for their kind of like unique genius in life?
That's great. That's perfect. We'll end it there. So we're gonna get to Q&A here. So let me we're gonna share again here. There we go. So again, thank you everyone for your participation today. If you have any questions, you want to reach out to us. There were some questions that came through that were specific to personal situations that we can't address, obviously, on a webinar, broadly speaking, but please reach out to your financial advisors if you have them at Mariner. If you do not, let's talk. you can feel free to reach out to us on our website at mariner.com/contact us. If you don't want to memorize that, mariner.com is pretty straightforward. So go there and you can reach our contact us page there. Now let's jump into the Q&A. So one of the first questions, and this I felt was pretty pertinent from the planning perspective that we were talking about and how we bring these conversations to our kids. Question is, if you share your total wealth with your family, how do you manage the risk of potentially infighting of who gets what, this is mine, this is theirs, and potentially reduce motivation to manage their own finances?
I can kind of kick that off. Just having this conversation a lot with clients, and there's really no one right answer to that, because I'll see families that they really want to be open and transparent, and they truly believe that they can tell their kids how much they have and how much they can expect to inherit, and it's not going to take away their kids' drive. I would say that's probably on the lesser of that I find, as far as the percentage of my clients that one way or another. Typically, it doesn't get introduced until, maybe they have already started down a career path. And so, it's not going to keep them from wanting to be really successful. So they might be older in life. And then I think it is important to have those conversations, because it can really, really help from a tax perspective for, someone in their 40s or 50s to have an idea of their, aging parents, 70s or 80s, what they can expect. And it's really been a great opportunity for me to, kind of talk about my parents and, hey, this is, let's dive into what you have, because if I can help you position these investments and, who gets what, as far as, my kids or me from, different taxable or IRA money, then I can really do this in a much more tax advantaged way. My dad was very against trusts, and I showed him, the importance of that and how it can be really beneficial. So, it's really kind of like this generation talking to our older generation, and on how to best plan to transfer it. There's the whole, concern too with if we're going to have a taxable estate. Well, if one of my clients is going to have a taxable estate from their inheritance, then we need to plan for that as soon as we can. So important reasons to have those conversations.
I can
That's great.
chime in too.
Yeah.
That's a great idea, Christina. I think you're right that conversation could be really helpful and like a bonding opportunity for some families, and it could be like catastrophic for others. So like you make the call. One kind of cool estate planning technique you can do is say, let's just say you have kids and a certain net worth, and you might say like, okay, here's what we have. Each kid we expect to get about, let's just say $3 million in as their inheritance, and it will be, in the form of a lifetime trust, and distributions will be, that trust will be protected from creditors and predators, and part of the stipulations will be tied to whatever values that you mentioned, whatever the person typed in there, like what's important to you. Do you want them to get an education or start a business, or do you want them to be a high earning, professional? All of those things can be tied to like distribution standards, which is kind of a cool idea to like control your money from beyond the grave. Kind of sounds bad, but it's an idea.
Well, it's good. And we do, and to encourage anyone, with these types of questions, our webinars are available on our website to view. The recordings are there. So feel free to go through there. There are lots of conversations we have around estate planning, family mission statements, and really financial statements about really what you want your wealth going towards, how to guide your family, how Christina put beyond the grave, right? To make sure that the purpose and really the sweat of your labor goes to the right direction, and that your family is aligned in that purpose. Now, with that, we are at time here. So I want to thank everyone for being here today. and for participating in the conversation, for your questions. Again, if you have additional questions, please reach out to your advisors here at Mariner. If you don't have an advisor, please reach out to us through our website, and we will talk to you soon.